Let me guess, you're a new player who's ready to dive into the Reaper's game but have absolutely no idea how to defend yourself against the opposition? Well, I'll tell you right now that unless you pony up and get with the program, you will be at the bottom of the heap and possibly get crunched before you even get to see the second day, let alone the end of the week. But don't factor yourself out of the equation just yet. You may have some untapped potential that's just waiting to be unleashed. Listen up, Zeptograms. If you want to avoid erasure and survive the week, then follow my lead and I'll make sure you get the hang of things while you enjoy your stay in the UG. It's time to learn the basics of combat. Just like its predecessor, NEO The World Ends With You holds the same idea in regards to the combat scenario with a few slight adjustments more or less. The concept is simple. While playing the Reaper's game, you'll be frequently thrown into the mix with different enemies, whether it be against the noise or possibly other players in the near future. To compensate for this, you'll be given different pins to utilize against the opposition. Each pin has their own psych as well as a button assigned to them so you won't get them mixed up. Take note that as you progress through the days, you'll gather more allies, which essentially gives you more access to more pins. More pins equals your chances of survival increasing, granted you know how to use them properly and how well you know how to avoid enemy attacks. To initiate a battle at any time, enable focus and start dragging random noise sigils your way. You can either fight a single battle or rack up additional sigils to begin what is called a chain battle sequence, the maximum being 5 fights for now. Take note that the more fights you get into, the stronger the enemy will become as you get through each reduction. You'll get additional rewards for chain fights, but it's always best to take things slow until you feel as though you're ready for such challenges. When starting a fight, you will immediately be thrown into the fray with the pins you currently have equipped for each character. Each pin has its own description depicting what's attached to it, the psych being utilized, its own attributes, the affinity or element associated with it, beat drop conditions, and unique abilities, which will be covered as we move on. When fighting your enemies, it's always best to look at what's ahead of you and determine your approach from there. You may either deal with small and or large groups depending on which sigil you picked up. With the pin you have, make your way and attack the target that's currently locked on. It's a straightforward process. Deal enough damage and they're out of the equation. Easy. You can switch between targets on the go, allowing for you to pick up on different enemies and take them out. My usual preference is always getting the larger targets out of the way since they deal more damage than the small fry surrounding them. When using your psychs, they have a set limit of how many times you can be used before they enter the reboot process, basically being on cooldown for a few seconds. During this time, you'll have to make do and either wait for the pin to come back up or use any other psychs that you have available. If you try to use a psych while it's rebooting, then your chosen character will be immobilized for a moment and might possibly be open to enemy attacks. Don't get careless on the field. Wait after the cooldown goes off and proceed to attack as you normally would. Over time, if you don't happen to use any of your pins, they'll actually start to recharge automatically without having to reboot, a mechanic that was not present in the first game, mind you. A great tactic would be to cancel out of your attack animations by dodging in between hits, which is possible, and when you start to see your pin gauge getting low, immediately switch to your other psychs. When the other pin is back to full, you can proceed to unleash your attacks however you wish. Keep in mind as each time you activate a psych, the gauge will decrease by a certain amount. The groove system is similar to the sync rate mechanic in the predecessor installment. In order to activate its abilities, you'll have to combine different attacks together amongst your group and proceed to drop the beat. You're probably wondering what I mean, and this is where the beat drop functionality comes into play. Every pin that you come across has a beat drop function that activates when you complete certain requirements. For example, Shockwave Psychs are your close quarter combat pins that have different combo finishers. When you happen to perform a finishing attack with Shockwave, it'll make a circular gauge appear letting you know that you have fulfilled the requirements for the beat drop. In order to actually increase your groove rate percentage, you'll have to quickly hit the BD gauge as soon as it appears with another psych that you have equipped before the timer runs out. If successful, your percentage rate will rise by a certain amount. This is where the idea of cooperation comes into play, and you'll have to incorporate this idea with your plan of attack. Each pin has a different BD requirement, and you can look up what they are when selecting your pin loadout. When the groove rate percentage has reached 100% full, you'll be able to perform a powerful technique which is called a Mashup. This attack not only deals heavy damage to your opponents, but if you happen to have a certain amount of party members on the field, its attack power will be multiplied. Mashup attacks are based solely off of what affinity your pin is as well as who performed the latest beat drop. There are many different mashup techniques, but for now we'll go with what most of us have experienced so far. Null mashups, which are obtained from non-elemental pins, can release orbs that will relentlessly attack the target surrounding you. Each time an orb hits an enemy, a bead drop will automatically appear on them, allowing you to bypass certain requirements and further increase your groove rate. Fire mashups, which are obtained from flame elemental pins, will drop a huge ball of fire upon your enemies, dealing massive AoE damage in the process. Afterwards, pools of fire will be left behind for a limited amount of time and damage any enemy caught within it. If I'm not mistaken, enemies who are hit with this can be afflicted with a burning status, but take this with a grain of salt. Frost mashups, which are obtained from ice elemental pins, will draw up multiple forms of ice from the ground, impaling unsuspecting opponents. Along with the damage output, any enemies that get hit and happen to withstand the attack will more than likely get hit with a freezing status, allowing you to attack them with no resistance on their end. Explosive mashups, which are obtained from burst elemental pins, will produce mini explosions across the playing field and damage anything that's caught within its radius. And lastly, earth mashups, which are obtained from stone elemental pins, will make it rain with huge stone craters falling from the sky, damaging anyone or anything who happens to be under its shadow. At the end of it all, it's up to you, the player, to put 2 and 2 together basically and see what works in your best interest. A few notes that you want to keep in mind. Pins will usually give you the details of what they're capable of as depicted by the red text that you would normally see in the game. They usually give off little hints like this Psych can inflict opponents with status effects, or this one can perform a decent knockback if used correctly. Not only that, but as you progress, you'll come across pins that have a unique ability attached to them. One example would be the Stone Elemental pin, Marvelous Crash, or when upgraded, Crater's Kiss. This pin has a unique ability called Aerial Assault that allows for you to perform additional damage on flying opponents. Always remember to search high and low for new pins that can give you an advantage against your opponents. One last tip for you is to calculate your attacks and use your psychs accordingly. Yes, you can use multiple pins at the same time, but usually doing so will probably mess up the rhythm that you have going on and may cause multiple pins to be on cooldowns. Use your psychs one at a time and switch between targets to keep the pace up. Some pins will usually require you to charge your attacks, but you'll still be able to move while doing so, which is pretty handy in most situations. The only problem is that sometimes your attack may miss since your opponent may try and avoid the hit. In this case, keep them preoccupied with other pins like shockwaves or force rounds, and when the moment is right, unleash your attack for maximum damage. But anywho, I'm just a random player or reaper who likes to give you advice for no reason whatsoever, and I hope that you Zeptograms learned a thing or two and will apply these instructions while you're in the UG. Until next time, hope you enjoy the Reaper's game. Love you all and peace.